The Sermon on the Hill, a story that changed the world. What if I told you that more than 2,000 years ago, on a quiet hillside far from the great cities of power, a single man spoke words that would echo across every century that followed? No armies, no crown, no throne, just a voice and a truth so powerful it reshaped the human heart itself. This is not a story of conquest. It's not about kings or empires. It's about one moment, one message that still whispers through the wind of time. This is the story of the Sermon on the Hill. Scene 1, the day the hill became a temple. The morning sun had just begun to rise above the rolling hills of Galilee. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of olive trees and fresh earth. Fishermen from the nearby sea walked barefoot through the grass, their nets still damp with salt water. Mothers carried children on their hips. Old men leaned on wooden staffs, whispering about the strange new teacher everyone had been talking about. And there, near the top of the hill, he stood, not with guards or banners, but simple and quiet, dressed in the humble garments of a traveler. His eyes reflected something no one could quite describe, gentleness, and yet a strength that seemed to see right through the soul. People had followed him for days. Some came out of curiosity. Some came for healing. Others came because something deep inside them, something they couldn't explain, told them this man carried words the world had forgotten. They didn't know it yet, but that morning would become one of the most remembered moments in all of human history. As the crowd settled into grass, he raised his gaze toward the horizon. The breeze quieted, as if even the earth itself was waiting to listen. And then he began to speak. Sun Scene 2, the words that reversed the world. The first thing he said wasn't a command. It wasn't a warning. It was a blessing. He didn't speak to kings or priests. He spoke to the ordinary, the weary, the broken, the forgotten. He said, in essence, blessed are those who feel small and unseen, because the kingdom of heaven belongs to you. You could feel the silence after those words. It was as though every burdened heart suddenly lifted, even just a little. He spoke of peace, not the peace of power or wealth, but the kind that begins inside, the kind that survives storms. He spoke of mercy and forgiveness, not as weakness, but as strength. And he spoke of love, a love that didn't draw lines between friend and enemy, or between worthy and unworthy. Every phrase turned the world's logic upside down. The poor, not the rich, would inherit something eternal. The gentle, not the violent, would claim the earth. The peacemakers, the ones who mend instead of destroy, will be called children of God. People looked at each other in wonder. No one had ever spoken like this before. Sheaf of Rice, Scene 3, a kingdom unlike any other. As he spoke, the idea of kingdom began to change forever. This wasn't a kingdom of walls or swords. It had no palace, no soldiers, no taxes. It was a kingdom built inside the human heart, where the throne was not made of gold, but of humility, where victory was not domination, it was compassion. He spoke of a world that could be, if only people would dare to live differently. In this kingdom, forgiveness would be stronger than revenge, faith would be greater than fear, and love would be the law above every other law. Some smiled, some wept, some sat in stunned silence, realizing that what they were hearing was not just a teaching. It was an invitation. Scene 4, the revolution of the heart. If you stood there that day, you would have seen it. Not a revolution of armies, but a revolution of souls. Every word he spoke felt like a spark striking stone. Old ideas began to crumble. People who had spent their lives chasing approval suddenly felt seen, known, loved, just as they were. He told them that true strength was not found in control, but in surrender, that real freedom didn't come from power, but from letting go of bitterness, and that peace didn't begin in nations. It began in hearts willing to forgive. The world around him was hard and cruel. The Roman Empire ruled with iron and blood. The religious leaders guarded their traditions like treasure chests. Yet here stood a man with no army, no wealth, and somehow his words carried more power than every sword in Jerusalem. Some behind small clouds, Scene 5, when heaven touched earth. There's a moment in every great story when heaven feels close, like the line between the divine and the human almost disappears. That's what happened on that hill. Because what Jesus spoke wasn't just philosophy. It was life itself, spoken in human language. He wasn't just explaining God's laws. He was revealing God's heart. When he spoke about forgiveness, it wasn't theory. He had looked into the eyes of betrayal, pain, and injustice, and still he said, "Forgive." When he spoke of loving your enemies, he wasn't naive. He knew what hate could do to a soul. He knew love was the only thing strong enough to break the chains of bitterness. And when he said to seek first the kingdom of heaven, he wasn't talking about escaping this world. He was showing how to live in it differently. Crescent Moon Scene 6. The crowd that saw the light. Hours passed. The sun began to dip, painting the hills in gold. Some people were still crying. Others sat still, their faces glowing with quiet awe. They didn't fully understand everything they had heard, but they knew, deep down, that they had just witnessed something sacred. One old man whispered to his grandson, "Remember this day, because the world will never be the same." And he was right. From that hillside in Galilee, those words would travel through generations, across oceans, through persecution and empires, until they reached us today. Because the Sermon on the Hill wasn't just spoken to them. It was spoken to every heart that still longs for meaning, every soul that still hungers for peace, every life that still needs forgiveness. Sunrise Scene 7, the invitation. So maybe you and I aren't standing on that hill, but the invitation remains. The same wind that carried his words across Galilee still whispers in our world today. It calls to those who are tired, those who are broken, those who've lost hope. It says, you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to be powerful. You just need to listen and believe that love is stronger than fear. That's where the story truly begins. Because the Sermon on the Hill was never meant to be a memory. It was meant to be a mirror, showing us who we could become. So as we step into the next part of this story, into the words that change the world, let's listen not just with our ears, but with our hearts. Because the same voice that spoke on that mountain still speaks today. The journey of the Son of Man. When the sun rose over the Sea of Galilee, its golden light shimmered across the gentle waves, painting the water like molten glass. Jesus stood upon the shore, his eyes calm yet filled with purpose. The breeze carried whispers of the divine, an unspoken calling that stirred the hearts of those who saw him. People gathered, fishermen, mothers, children, the weary and forgotten. They came not only for miracles, but for meaning. And when he spoke, it was not merely to teach, it was to awaken something deep within the human soul. Blessed are the poor in spirit, he said, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Each word seemed to pierce through centuries of silence. Those who listened felt as though time itself had stopped, and heaven leaned closer to earth. From village to village, Jesus walked not as a king in robes, but as a humble teacher. His sandals collected the dust of the roads, yet his presence left behind a trail of light. He healed the sick with a touch, restored sight to the blind, and calmed the storm with a single command. But the greatest miracle of all was unseen. It was the transformation of hearts. He spoke of love that defied reason, of forgiveness that shattered cycles of hate, of a kingdom not built by swords, but by mercy. And yet, not everyone rejoiced. The same crowd that followed him also carried seeds of doubt. Religious leaders watched from afar, their faces shadowed with suspicion. Who is this man, they murmured, who claims authority even over sin? Still, Jesus pressed forward. He dined with sinners, embraced the outcasts, and told stories that revealed heaven's mysteries through simple earthly scenes: a mustard seed, a lost coin, a shepherd seeking one stray sheep. Each parable was a window. Through it, people could glimpse the Father's heart. But with every truth revealed, the tension grew. The light drew closer to the darkness, and darkness began to stir. One evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Jesus withdrew to pray. Alone beneath the olive trees, he spoke to the Father. The night air was thick with stillness, and the stars shimmered like tears in heaven's eyes. He knew what was coming. The cross was already casting its shadow. His disciples, though loyal, could not yet comprehend. They dreamed of glory, of a kingdom on earth, not realizing that the road to heaven would first pass through suffering. And so came the Passover. The upper room was lit by flickering lamps. The air carried the scent of bread and wine. Jesus looked at the 12 who had followed him through storms and miracles alike. His gaze was both tender and sorrowful. "This is my body given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In that moment, the ordinary became holy. The bread became a covenant. The wine, a promise of redemption. Then the betrayal. In the quiet garden of Gethsemane, as moonlight fell upon olive branches, Jesus knelt and prayed with such anguish that his sweat fell like drops of blood. The disciples slept nearby, unaware of the weight of eternity pressing down upon that moment. And through the silence came footsteps. Torches flickered, a kiss from a friend, and the chains of destiny closed around him, dragged before councils and rulers. Jesus stood calm amidst chaos. False accusations flew like arrows, but he remained silent. The very ones he came to save demanded his death. Pilate, torn between justice and fear, washed his hands, but no water could cleanse that guilt. And so the road to Calvary began. The sky dimmed as he carried the cross, would rough against torn flesh. Crowds jeered, soldiers mocked, yet amid it all he whispered forgiveness. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Nails pierced, blood flowed, heaven wept, yet in that moment of agony, love triumphed. The very thing meant to break him became the bridge between God and humanity. The earth trembled, the veil tore, and silence fell. The light seemed gone, but in that silence, heaven was already preparing dawn. The resurrection and the promise of light. The world fell silent. The skies hung heavy, as if heaven itself mourned. Upon the hill of Golgotha, the cross stood, stark and still against the storm. The crowd had gone, the voices had faded, and only the wind carried whispers of what had been. But even in death, his words lingered. "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." They laid his body in a tomb hewn from stone. The entrance was sealed with a great rock. Guards stood watch, for fear the prophecy would somehow come true. The world believed it was over. Darkness had won. 3 days passed, quiet, heavy, unchanging. And then morning broke. The first light of dawn crept over the horizon, painting the sky with colors of resurrection. The earth seemed to breathe again. The stone, that immovable barrier, was rolled away. The tomb was empty. An angel, radiant with divine light, spoke to the trembling women who came to mourn. "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He is not here, he is risen." Fear turned into wonder. Tears became joy. And in that moment, all creation seemed to awaken to a truth that had been written since the beginning of time, that death was not the end, but a doorway. Jesus appeared, not as a ghost, but alive, radiant, human, and divine. He walked among his followers, spoke peace to their trembling hearts, and showed them the wounds that love had borne. "Peace be with you," he said. They touched his hands. They saw the mark of the nails. But instead of despair, they felt hope, a hope that could never die. On the shores of Galilee, he stood once more, just as he had at the beginning. The morning mist rose from the sea, and the familiar scent of salt filled the air. The disciples, weary and uncertain, cast their nets, and when they looked back to shore, they saw him waiting. "Come and eat," he called softly. The fire crackled, the fish sizzled, and for a fleeting moment, time stood still. It was not merely a meal. It was communion, a quiet assurance that love had conquered everything. From that day forward, his followers carried his light into the world, a light that no empire could extinguish, no lie could bury, no darkness could overcome. They faced persecution, exile, and even death. But through every trial, one truth remained. The tomb was empty. The promise was fulfilled. The Savior lives. And through centuries, that same light still burns. In cathedrals and humble homes, in whispered prayers and broken hearts made whole. It is a light that calls every soul out of its own tomb of fear and doubt into life and grace. Because the resurrection was not only his story, it was ours. Every time we forgive when it hurts, every time we choose love over hate, every time we rise again after falling, that is resurrection. So when the world feels dark and distant, remember, the stone can still be rolled away. The dawn will come again, and the voice that spoke through the ages still whispers today. Behold, I am with you always, even to the end of the age. The story does not end at the cross. It begins there, and its echo continues in every heart that dares to believe.